Hi, welcome. Here's another music theory video on intervals. This one I'm focusing on creating augmented and diminished intervals. Okay, so if you haven't seen any of my other videos, please check those out. I've covered major intervals and perfect intervals. I've covered creating minor intervals, and this one's taking it a step further, looking at the augmented and diminished type intervals. So let's move into looking at this. So over here we've got a bit of a platform. We looked at the major key intervals and we found that you've got your perfect, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh and perfect octave. Now all of these can be turned into augmented intervals. So let's give that a go. So here we go. So we're going to turn an augmented unison. There's a little bit of controversy over this one, but I won't get into too much of that. I'll treat it as if it does exist. So let's shift that one up a semitone. Okay, so this computer's, you should have one natural, one sharp, but my computer's not being able to display that quite as way I would like, but I'll move on to the next one. So we could have C to D, and we augment that, so we're stretching that distance a little bit more. So we've got D to C to D sharp. The next one I've got C to E, so let's expand that one a bit further, just by one semitone. We want one semitone. There we go. Now with these, E to F is literally the same sound as an E sharp, but when you've got these intervals, you've got to have the right letter name. So C, D, E is the third. If I had that as an F, C, D, E, F, it would be a fourth. So we've got to make sure we've got the right letter names with these. So now I've got an augmented third. The fourth, so I can have it C to F sharp. The fifth, C to G sharp. And the sixth, we can take that up to a sharp, and we want the B to a B sharp. We don't want to put that as a C, it needs to be a B sharp, and then we can have the augmented octave. Okay, so there we go with those ones. So those, most people agree that we can have those augmented intervals. Okay, just be careful with how you're notating the augmented unison, although some people debate that one. What happens if I had notes that I was starting with that were already sharps? So let's move at another example of the same thing. So here I've got everything starting on D, and I've already got a couple of these notes as sharps. So we'd move that one up a semitone. Okay, and I might put a natural sign over there as well. We'd move the E, we'd raise that one. Now with this one, we raise the F sharp, we need to move that up to a double sharp. So that looks like a Roman numeral X, okay, in the space or on the relative line when it's needed. So we move that one, the G up to a G sharp, the A goes up, the B goes up to a sharp, and then again with this one, we're going to be putting that one as a double sharp as well. And then we've got the augmented octave as well. Okay, so hopefully that helps you point out some of the augmented intervals. You're basically stretching it by one semitone, either a major or a perfect interval. Let's move over to the next examples here, where we've got perfect and minor intervals. So these were some more that I looked at in one of my other videos. So go check out how we created those. So I've got my perfect unison, minor second, minor third, perfect intervals, minor sixth, minor seventh, and perfect octave at the end there. And we discussed in another video that the major intervals are relative to the minor intervals. So what happens if we then lower these intervals? Okay, so let's move over to my next example where we can create diminished intervals. Okay, I'm going to come back to the concept of diminished unison. There's a bit of controversy over that one. But I'll move on to the diminished second. So at the moment I've got a minor second here from C to D. So if I then lower a flat note, I don't want to land on another C. I've got to keep the D note. So we're going to write that as a C to a D double flat. which is a little bit of a weird one because a D double flat is a C. So I'll leave that one with you just to contemplate for a bit. Next thing, we've got a diminished third, a minor third, so let's lower that down. So we can have a diminished third. Okay. Again, think about what that might mean. In reality, we'll be hearing a C to a D note, because an E down 2 semitones will be an E double, a D. So E flat or E double flat down twice would be down to a D sound. Okay, so again, have a think about how that might work out. But on paper, we've got a diminished third. A diminished fourth, we'd have to lower that one. Diminished fifth, we'd lower that one. A diminished sixth, we'd need to lower that twice. A diminished seventh, we'd lower that. And a diminished octave. Okay, so you're noticing with some other things to observe here, I'm not calling the fourth and fifth a minor fourth or a minor fifth. I'm calling them a diminished fourth and diminished fifth. The same thing with the octave. I'm calling that a diminished octave as well. Okay, so we're getting into a few different things here where we're getting the enharmonic equivalent sort of sounds of other intervals, but on paper we're creating these sort of diminished intervals. Okay, that said, I don't often, in my line of the theory that I tend to do, I don't often come across a lot of diminished seconds and diminished thirds. Definitely diminished sevenths come across in a lot of the chords and things. Diminished sixths come across a little bit just because of how you've got to notate certain things in the harmony. Okay, so it's definitely fun theory to sort of contemplate where you might use these sorts of things. Okay, another thing I might point out with the diminished fifth and the augmented fourth happen to be exactly the same sort of sound there, but on paper it's notated because of the fifth, the G to the C, or the F to the C. It's got to be a fourth or a fifth. The other name for that one, I'll just let you know, is also known as the tritone, but that might be another video about those ones. Okay, let's come back now to this diminished unison. Let's have a think about this one for a bit now. So with most of these intervals, when you're lowering them, you'll end up with, so if I lower this one, okay, in one way, some people agree that this is a diminished unison. Other people think that, how is that possible? Reason being is when you're thinking about intervals, the distance between notes, so they're sort of about counting distances in semitones. Okay, so the concept of thinking a minor semitone, so C down to C flat, doesn't quite work with some people's thinking with that one. Okay, the other view is this just still an augmented unison going from C flat up to C? Because if I was to reverse that and have that, oh, wrong one, there, and have C flat to C, is that just an augmented unison, which most people agree with? Okay, so I'll leave this one just for you to think about. Feel free to comment about this one in the chat. I'm curious about your view behind this one. I haven't come to my final decision on this one just yet, although I've read a few discussions either way on whether the diminished unison does really exist or has some valid in having it as a name. Okay, so just recapping, if I go back a few steps, we can have our augmented intervals. Okay, so that's where you're expanding your interval, and then you've got your where did it go? Diminished intervals, where you're sort of lowering your interval. Okay, so particularly your perfect intervals can be diminished, your perfect intervals can be augmented, then you've got some of your major and minor intervals that can also be diminished and augmented as well. So hopefully I've been able to give you a little bit of thought about augmented and diminished intervals and understand that how you can be going about creating them from your intervals. If you haven't checked out my major and minor intervals one, definitely go check out those videos. There should be a link nearby. Definitely comment below on your thoughts about intervals. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.